guest this hour is going to be Ron Klinefelter. Ron Klinefelter is the owner of the Spring Valley Organic Growers, a small organic growers market corporation in North Central Arkansas. He's been growing for over 30 years and growing commercially for 9 years. He grows organic vegetables and berries in season and has 2 greenhouses. He runs the farm by himself and enjoys working in the sunshine and the fresh air of God's green earth. Looking forward to talking to this guy. Good morning, Ron.
Good morning, Ted. Greetings from the Ozarks.
Well, I tell you what, you got a beautiful part of the country here, and that's a fact. How's your weather been this winter?
It's been up and down like a yo-yo. We had some unexpectedly warm weather, and we've had some pretty cold. Last week we had a half-inch ice and 4 inches of snow on it, but now it's all melted, and tomorrow's supposed to be 65 and sunny, so, you know, it's like being on a pogo stick.
Let me tell you, a couple of years ago, my 14-year-old, he was 13, and my 13-year-old son decided he was going to plant a garden, and we got a bunch of these seeds from the local organic grower place. Then we wanted to grow all organic, and he put the peat moss in the soil, and he did all the things he was supposed to do, and then nothing came up, and then finally something came up, and the tomatoes turned black, and the beans turned bad, and nothing worked. I mean, it was an absolute disaster. What in the world did we do wrong, and what should we do the next time? Because, you know, if the soup hits the fan in the United States and we have a supply line disruption with food and we have to start growing our own food, the vast majority of people are going to be just like me that aren't trained in this, and they're not going to know how in the world to cook or to prepare food. I mean, everybody's pretty much now just storing food as far as freeze-dried food because they don't have a way to replenish the ability of doing that. So what's going on with the soil? What's going on with the pH? Is there aluminum in the soil now? Is there barium in the soil from all this geoengineering that they're doing? I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with that or not. I mean, and how's that affecting the crops and the yield right now, Ron?
Well, there is quite a learning curve, of course, to growing. There's a great deal of factors without looking at a soil test of your soil. What happens, though, is there's a saying that says nature would rather rot something than to grow something. So one of the possible problems you might have had is you put so much organic matter in the soil and mixed it in that it just almost choked it to death, because what will happen is any nitrogen that's available will immediately be bound up and taken up by the organic matter trying to rot it down, and it will be locked up tight, unavailable to the plants, and will not be returned until the breakdown process is complete. That's why you want to really be careful and not put a lot in it. Now, we keep we have 8 gardens. They're all under permanent mulch, and I keep a real thick layer of whatever I can get, ground up leaves, straw, hay. I get those and put it on deeply, but I put it on the surface and just let it break down slowly. When I want to plant, I'll just dig down through it till I hit the soil and plant right into that. That way I'm not mixing it up so severely and adding so much problems to the soil.
Well, you know, it's interesting you said that, because we had gone and ordered a whole truckload of, they called it potting soil or growing soil that had, I guess it had cow manure in it. And, you know, and we thought that would be the best thing to do because it's an organic fertilizer. And we thought we'd put that in there. We mixed it up and we tilled it all in there real nice. And I'm telling you, man, it just didn't grow anything. I mean, we got a few beans here and there. And I mean, why did the tomatoes turn black like they did? I mean, what happened with the tomatoes? I thought tomatoes could grow very easily.
That I've been thinking about that. I have no idea what happened with that. I have never in my life seen a tomato plant turn black.
Well, that was awful. I mean,
I have heard and I have read that some of the bagged soil amendments and stuff, the cheap ones like they sell at, you know, Walmart and stuff, actually some of them are somewhat toxic. They're not the best thing that you can use. Organics is always good. If it's truly organic stuff, it's good. You can pile it on a foot deep as long as you just let it rot at its own rate. It eventually will turn into good soil.
We're going to the break. We'll be right back. We'll have more about organic gardening when we come back. Do you have a list of anything that's the do's and don'ts of gardening that you want to go over with us, or do you want me to just go ahead and start asking you some questions?
Well, go ahead and shoot with some of your questions.
Okay. Number one, how important is it that we set the seeds or the seedlings out on the right time? Is it important to do it with a full moon, lack of a moon? I mean, what's the best way to do that? Because I've read both sides of that with the Farmer's Almanac, and I've seen the people to do it both ways. And it's frustrating to me because my dad was a great farmer. My brother's a farmer up in Iowa, but I wasn't raised on the farm like they were. I was raised down here in Florida, so I don't have the ideas of how to do all that. How important is it when you set those seeds, and how important is the timing?
We have 8 gardens. We plant hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of plants and seeds. So I don't have a lot of time to study out what each little thing gets and what each little, but I do believe there is something to planting by the moon. The general rule of thumb, if you don't follow anything else, is they say that seeds that go downward when they grow, like carrots, beets, that kind of thing, plant when the moon has become full and then is on its way back down to the little thumbnail. The other thing they say is plants that are going up, like corn and beans and tomatoes, plant when the moon is getting more full, when it's, going from little to big. I think there's a lot more to that. I haven't had time to really implement that and study it out, but I do know this. I saw an amazing video it was in Newfoundland, where it showed a nice peaceful little village, and there was boats, sailboats and stuff tied up to a dock, and then it showed it 12 hours later. And they had long extension ladders going from the dock down to the boats that were sitting in the mud, because the tide falls something like 48 feet, rises and falls in that part of the country. So there's definitely an influence. There's no doubt there's an influence on growing.
So you don't know whether you should plant with the full moon or not?
Well, like I said, if the moon has reached full and is starting to get smaller, that's a good time to plant stuff going down, root crops.
Okay.
When it's little and going to big, I plant the stuff that's going up.
Well, I guess that's, like you said, it has to do with the flow of gravity, flow of water, flow of everything else. Okay, next question I had for you. How about proper spacing? How important is it? Should we keep them further apart instead of getting them on top of each other? I mean, because when Harrison planted the garden a few years ago, it seemed like he had way too much stuff planted in there, and it became overgrown.
Yeah, spacing's important. The plant needs to have its own room. It also depends on how good your soil is. Because if your soil is good, you can crowd them quite a bit. Now, it's still going to limit the growth some, because you're going to, one plant is going to cut the light out from another that's needed. So, it's like a balance. Now, there is another factor. I don't know, the Indians in the Southwest used to plant clumps of corn, and then a big space, several feet, and then clumps of corn. But they did that for water conservation, and so the plants wouldn't dry out so fast.
Okay, so is that back when they were putting the fish in the soil with everything?
Well, no, that was kind of the Pilgrim East Coast thing. This is in the desert Southwest. And if you would just plant, say you're planting corn, and you plant one here and move over a foot and a half, and you plant another and then move over, then they're going to dry out a lot quicker. So they clump together, maybe a half a dozen or a dozen plants in one hole. But they strictly did that because of water conservation.
I was in Montana a few years ago.
So fast.
I was in Montana a few years ago, Ron, and they actually had they actually put a black tarp over the soil and poked holes in the black tarps and had the seeds come through the holes. Mm-hmm. And they had irrigation under the black tarps. They had run like a weeper hose underneath it. And they said that because of the change in temperature in Montana, because of the hot and the cold every day, even in the summertime, you sometimes get down to the 50s at night, that they'd have a lot of condensation on that plastic underneath every morning, and that was actually enough water to water most crops. They had very rarely ever add additional water from the weeper hoses. Have you ever heard of that?
Sure. The black plastic, a lot of people, even in, say, the Midwest and that region, they'll grow, the commercial growers, they'll grow like cantaloupes and melons and things that really want heat. They'll put that because it will heat the soil a lot faster. Now, up in Montana and up north, I would think you would almost have to do that because it just doesn't ever get all that warm. So a plant can stand quite a bit of cold of itself just standing there. But what it can't stand is cold soil and cold roots. I can go down to the, garden center. I haven't, but I could go down there probably right now at Walmart or something, and they would have pots of tomatoes that are probably 2 feet tall and getting blooms on them. And I'm thinking, I wouldn't buy one of those for anything because when you set it out in the soil, it's just going to sit there until that soil warms up. It might not do anything for a couple, 3 weeks, because it's not going to start sending those roots out until that soil is warm enough.
Well, I never thought, but I always thought the bigger the plant, you get it in the ground, not have any root trauma to it, it would actually work pretty well. But you're saying it doesn't work that way as long as the soil is cold you're putting it into.
Yeah. See, there's always this, there's always this kind of friendly competition at farmers market and stuff. Who's going to get the first tomato? I really don't care about it because I know that the tomatoes aren't really going to produce much until that soil is warm. So someone might plant a foot-tall transplant, 2 weeks ahead of me, and then I go ahead and plant one, and I'll still have tomatoes about the same time as you because the soil just isn't warm enough.
Well, that's interesting. I have a real bad tomato allergy, so I don't eat tomatoes anyhow. Plus, they're a nightshade variety of vegetables, along with.
Yes, they are. And do you know that all potatoes except reds are nightshade family as well?
That's right. You got the potatoes, you got the bell peppers, you got the tomatoes, and I know that me personally, if I start eating a lot of tomatoes, other than the allergy, it starts giving me problems with rheumatoid arthritis. And people don't realize that one of the first things you got to do if you have rheumatoid arthritic conditions, you got to cut all the nightshades out.
Mm-hmm. All the fun things to eat, huh?
Well, tomatoes are much fun. I mean, I'd rather have a steak, But tell me about organic versus non-organic. Tell me about GMO. Tell me what you know about that. Do you know anything about the controversy that's surrounding the GMO and Monsanto and the Terminator genes that are put into the plants that won't allow you to replant the seeds that come from those plants, and you can't get a second harvest from them. You have to continue to buy stuff from Monsanto. Give me your take on that. What do you think about all that? Because I know you're an organic farmer, so you've got to be well versed in some of that.
It's some of the worst evil that has come upon this planet. The story of Pandora's box, where she opens the lid and lets stuff out that can't ever be put back in.
I know the story.
Yeah, nature should not be tampered with. Now, there's hybridization, which is simply taking the traits from two best plants and combining them, crossbreeding them.
That's
you
okay.
get a stronger plant, or you get a plant that maybe produces a better fruit or earlier or more. But when they start splicing genes and stuff, they're messing with stuff that, God never intended to happen. And when, that's what we're experiencing with, I'm from Iowa originally, and a lot of my cousins are big farmers, big time. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of acres. I don't even know how you could grow non-GMO corn up in Iowa because of the drift of the pollen. They've just set something loose that's it's evil to the core. Now, my grandpa was a farmer up in Iowa. And that was about the time when they were starting to, go to the chemicals and stuff. He was just he threw he'd spread the manure on the fields and so on, and he had some of the most beautiful soil there ever was. I mean, you didn't even have to harrow it. You just roll it over with the mold-bore plow, which they did at that time. And it was just beautiful. I mean, it was ready to plant.
Ron, have you seen the photo? Have you seen the photos of the mice that are given straight GMO corn and GMO crops, and within 30, 40 days are covered in tumors
and stuff? Yeah. See, 100 years ago, everyone was an organic farmer.
That's right.
In the narrowest sense of the word, I guess. Everyone was. It wasn't until relative recent times that all this tampering with stuff has started. Artificial pumping up of plants with high-powered fertilizers and then the genetic modification. GMO is going to be it's going to be a bigger problem than ever. And it's just going to keep getting bigger and bigger because I don't think some of this they can ever contain it.
Now, you said something a second ago, Ron. I want you to explain it to the listeners because I understand it, which seems odd to me maybe because my dad's. Your Klinefelter, that's a German name. When did your grandfather come over from Germany? It was my great-grandfather that did.
What year? He came over.
1800s?
And my mother's side came from Sweden. Okay. So pretty much everybody was immigrants back then of one kind or another.
Back in the 1800s?
Yeah, probably. I don't know the exact dates. But,
okay, we're going to another break. We'll be right back with Ron Klinefelter. We're going to talk about pollen drift when we come back and why we've got to stop the GMO crops or we'll all be in trouble pretty quick. Stay tuned. Ron Klinefelter. I want to read a real quick article that we're talking about pollen drift for a second. This is the Shopper's Guide to Pesticides in Produce. It says nearly two-thirds of the 3,000 produce samples tested by the U.S. Department of Agriculture contain pesticide residues. Surprise finding in the face of soaring consumer demand for food without agricultural chemicals. It says that the USDA test found a total of 165 different pesticides on thousands of fruit and vegetable samples examined in 2013. The USDA findings indicate that the conventional fruit and produce industries are ignoring a striking market trend. American consumers are voting with their pocketbooks for produce with less pesticides. The USDA's Economic Research Service estimates the originally produced food sector, or the organically produced food sector, though just 4% of all U.S. That's pathetic. It's 4% of all U.S. food sales has enjoyed double-digit growth in recent years. The trend is particularly strong for the sales of organic fruits and vegetables, which account for the lion's share of all organic food sales. The USDA economists report that organic produce sales spiked from $5.4 billion in 2005 to $15 billion last year, and increased by 11% between 2013 and 2014. Pesticides persisted on fruits and vegetables tested by the USDA, even when they were washed and in some cases peeled. Highlights of the Dirty Dozen. Key findings, 99% of apples were contaminated with pesticides. The average potato had more pesticides by weight than any other produce. A single grape and a sweet bell pepper sample contained 15 pesticides. Single samples of cherry, tomatoes, nectarines, peaches, and imported snap peas and strawberries had 13 different pesticides each. The Klinefelter. The EWS Klinefelter is a list of produce least likely to hold pesticide residues, consists of avocados, sweet corn, which is probably GMO, pineapples, cabbage, frozen sweet peas, onions, asparagus, mangoes, papayas, kiwis, eggplant, grapefruit, cantaloupe, cauliflower, and sweet potatoes. Relatively few pesticides were detected on these foods, and tests found low concentrations of pesticides on them. Key findings. Avocados were the cleanest. Only 1% of avocado samples showed any detectable pesticides. 89% of pineapples, 82% of kiwi, 80% of pineapples, or of papayas had no pesticides. The Dirty Dozen Plus. For the third year in a row, we have expanded the Dirty Dozen, the Plus category, which includes leafy greens and kale and collard greens. Then it goes into genetically modified crops. Now people are trying to avoid this. And then it talks about something right here, Ron, that's really important to me and to the listeners. Pesticides found in baby foods. It said that the USDA tested 379 baby food applesauce contaminants for 5 pesticides. 23% of the samples contained extreme pesticide concentrations. Now, what's interesting to me about this is, pesticides are a xenoestrogen. They feminize you. And when you have little babies that are being fed xenoestrogens in their formulas or their baby food, you end up really messing up what's called the endocrine or the glandular system in the body, and you can feminize these young boys at a very, very young age and cause all kinds of health problems with the young girls who will be given this. So first let's talk about pollen drift, and let's come back and talk about these pesticides in just a minute. Tell me what you meant by pollen drift in Iowa and how there are no crops that are non-GMO in Iowa. You don't understand how there possibly could be because of pollen drift. Go ahead, Ron. Well, that's nice. Okay. Well, we lost Ron on our signal here, so we're good with that. So let me just continue on this little stuff with the baby food. It goes on in detail. It says the USDA's most recent pesticide monitoring data includes hundreds of samples of applesauce, carrots, peaches, and peas packaged as baby foods. Because cooking reduces levels of pesticides, I don't know how it does that. I guess it must be the nature of them, the heat, and baby food cooked before packaging. Ron, we were just talking about what was going on with pesticides in produce and in baby foods and how bad that is. And you had mentioned before we had gone to the break about pollen drift. Could you explain to everybody what that means?
Well, the wind on certain things, and corn is a really bad one. The wind, grabs the pollen and takes it as far as the wind can blow. In other words, if you have a field of really nice non-GMO corn you're growing, and your neighbor, or even your neighbor a mile up the road, is growing GMO corn and it's windy, you're going to get that pollen pollinating your plants and putting genetic components into your plants. That's why some years ago up in Canada, the canola grower got sued by Monsanto. He was growing regular canola. Monsanto was having the farmers around him grow the canola that was GMO, and they went into his field illegally, I would think, and took samples, and lo and behold, they found genetic components in his non-GMO canola, and they sued him. And what was particularly disturbing is that the Monsanto and their team of lawyers won. They won that case.
Hang on, we're going to come back in just a moment. We're going to talk more about pesticides. We're going to another break. Back with Ron, and we'll be taking your phone calls after the break. With Ron Klinefelter. He's our organic gardening expert, and we're talking about GMOs, GMO drift, and what's going on with pollen. I'm going to open up the phone calls now for you guys to ask him any questions. Ron, you said you had a list of stuff that you wanted to go over real quick. Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to kind of just talk to most of the listeners that are either gardening or going to garden or would like to garden. This kind of tell what we've been doing this spring, and they can kind of jump in there at whatever level they're doing. We do all winter. We do soil preparation. We keep hauling in organics and stacking them on. We take the cages down and sharpen the stakes and put up bird houses all around the fields and stuff. And we just last week we put over 600 seeds in kind of a homemade germination chamber that maintains about 80 degrees. So they'll be sprouting in the next just few days of hundreds of peppers and tomatoes and so on and so forth. We planted the second crop of greens in the greenhouse. 3 days ago I inoculated peas, garden peas, and planted 150 foot of row of peas with trellises for them to climb on. And we've got row cover in our greenhouse for when it gets really, really cold. When it gets down to single digits, we took that off because I think we're done with that. But we also have row cover outside. It's kind of the poor man's greenhouse. In my book about greenhouses, I show you how to make little greenhouse row cover tunnels. And the row cover, we're still got that on. We've got a beautiful crop of spinach that I planted last fall, and it overwintered. It'll be ready to sell, anytime now. way ahead of all the other stuff. Also was reading some interesting research from the University of New Hampshire where they were saying that putting row cover over your strawberries as opposed to the traditional straw or hay actually gave them 75% more berries. That's just an astounding increase. So
wow, that is amazing. Is that, so what you're doing with the row cover, you're talking about you cover up the rows as you're producing the crop?
Well, yeah, in like our spinach bed, for instance, we have these little row cover tunnels we've made, and we cover them with 6 foot wide. I buy it by the 250-foot roll, 6 foot wide, and the row cover tunnels are 5 foot, so it covers it with 6 inches on each side. You can put rocks or bricks or 2x4s just to hold it down from the wind. And what you're doing is you're just modifying the climate slightly. Now, in the greenhouse, you're modifying it greatly because you've already got the greenhouse causing, warmer temperatures. And then when it gets really cold, if you put row cover over your stuff in the greenhouse, again, you're gaining a few more degrees or like moving a couple climate zones south. It's really amazing what you can do.
Wow, that's interesting. So, but let's go back to now. How important is it to plant organic seeds versus, how do we know a seed is organic? How do we actually know that when we go to Walmart, we buy a bag of seeds and it says organic seeds? Do we even know that?
Oh, not for sure. I don't do that. I have 2 or 3 real favorite places that I buy my seed from, and one of them is like up in Vermont. They're just rabidly organic and anti-GMO, and their stuff is truly organic. That's what I buy from the seed. But even if it's not truly organic, because some seeds they treat with a kind of a fungicide just so they don't rot in cool ground, that's not such a big deal. But the way you grow it and the soil that it's grown in is a huge deal. Because back in the 30s, the U.S. Department of Agriculture did a big soil survey over all the United States. And they pretty much, to generalize these huge findings, pretty much the soils that were being farmed were already mostly depleted of the trace elements like, zinc and selenium and the micronutrients. And so we spend a lot of time and energy and money getting organic fertilizers and rock minerals in our soil. Including a new one that I've tried this last year. It's a volcanic thing. It's called paramagnetic rock, and it's ground up fine, highly magnetic volcanic rock, and it actually has so much electrical properties that once you put it in, it'll stay there forever, basically. And
I've heard about that, Ron. That's supposed to be the latest, greatest thing. Let me promote your books real quick. When you go to the Power Mall, we've got books by Ron Klinefelter. This is one of the top organic gardening experts in the United States. He has greenhouse plans. You can get them through the Power Mall. Easy to build outdoor fire pits, cookers, and other projects by Ron Klinefelter. The Power Hour Garden Seed Package, 42 varieties, open pollinated, GMO-free, heirloom seeds available at the Power Hour Mall that have been basically endorsed by Ron. Each of these kits includes the best little booklet called The Basic Gardening Handbook Seed Packages. Call the Power Mall at 1-877-817-9829. That's 877-817-9829. If you're like I am, you want to make sure you know how to plant a garden in time of a crisis so that we can all stay here and feed our families. Ron has it down to a fine art. He's fine-tuned it. He has the ability to grow organic gardens and organic produce without the use of pesticides, without the use of all these chemical fertilizers, which is important because it takes us back to nature. Isn't that right, Ron?
It is right. However, organic is not just the absence of pesticides and herbicides and fungicides. Truly organic stuff, it has a really highly fertile, highly enriched soil. Our soil, I don't even do soil tests anymore because their charts didn't go that high on some of the stuff like phosphorus. And so What happens is our stuff, and this can be proved by a refractometer, a German optical instrument. Our stuff is so high that it keeps longer. It is higher in minerals. The more minerals, the sweeter it is, and the more minerals in your plant, the healthier the plant, and the longer it keeps. When just shelf life. It's a win-win-win-win situation all the way around.
It's funny. Most people that you have on most hosts would not know what a carbohydrate refractometer is. That's used to measure the sugar content. It looks like a little telescope that's about 8 inches long. And you put a couple drops of liquid from the plant on it, and it tells you exactly what the percentage of dissolved sugar or dissolved solids is. And you're absolutely right. The higher the refractometer reading, the higher the mineral content of that fruit or that vegetable. And when you do refractometer readings on non-organic, on these GMO foods, it's almost at zero. The same thing with watermelons. They're almost zero when they're all GMO.
Interesting. We get green beans the scale is in Brix, B-R-I-X. I don't know who thought that idea, but it goes from 0 to 48, and 48 would be like pure maple syrup. It's we get Brix readings of like 16 on our green beans, which is fantastically sweet. And we had a guy here that was a soil scientist in the area, and he checked all summer. He'd go every time he'd go to town, he'd grab a little handful of green beans from all different grocery stores. I mean, every one of them. And he'd run home and he'd test them. And his highest reading all summer that he ever got was 1. And many of the readings were less than 1.
That's correct. And it's interesting.
What that means, Ted, is if you eat a bowl of beans, of our beans, in order to get that same amount of nutrients as you get in our one bowl of beans, if you get some of these half Brix beans from the store, you'd have to eat 32 bowls to get the same amount of minerals as one bowl of our green beans.
You're absolutely right. There was a soil doctor, agricultural specialist here in the 60s in Florida. His name was Dr. Kerry Reams. I don't know if you've heard of him or not. And he was well known.
He said that he raised his kids with a Bible in one hand and a refractometer in the other.
That's exactly right. So you know who he is. You're probably surprised I know who he is. And what was interesting about Kerry Reams is he actually put a formula together for human beings as far as the proper numbers. And he said the proper amount of sugar in the urine for a human being, if they're functioning properly, if you check the sugar on a refractometer, is 1.5 Brix. And I thought that was interesting. I studied a lot of the stuff that he had talked about, and that's when I learned about the higher the mineral content, the sweeter the fruit. And if you understand that, even the denser the fruit, he even said if you have 2 bananas and one banana, they're both the same size, but one of them's a couple ounces heavier, that means it has more mineral density than the other one. And folks don't realize when you eat all this food that doesn't have any Brix content, it doesn't have any mineral content, so it will sustain life, but it will not support health. And that's the problem.
And that's why people have cravings. That because they're not getting the complement of minerals that they need, and so they get these cravings, which they override and bomb them with things like potato chips and soda pop and candy bars and so on, which temporarily override that craving. But the real reason they're having that craving is they're not getting enough minerals in their body, and that's exactly what we try and do with our produce. Is I have a special mix of organic fertilizers. I put in every hole I transplant. I put in every row where I put seeds directly on them.
But no, I wish I was living close to you. I'd be buying all my produce from you. I guarantee you that immediately. What's your phone number, Ron? If people live near you, they can come by and see you.
I wonder if I should give that. Actually, let me give you this. My website, which I'm fortunate enough to have my son as a webmaster. He does a website for me. It's called SpringValleyOrganicGrowers.com.
SpringValleyOrganicGrowers.com. Okay, we've got a phone call from Julie in Alabama right now. Julie in Alabama, you have a question for Ron. You're live. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I have 3, and I'll just list them offline to the answer. The first one is, my compost pile seems to work slowly. Could he tell us about how to make a compost tea? Would that be something quicker? And then my second question is, if I grow and buy blue corn it makes me feel like I'm safe from GMOs, blue corn. And my third question is, Dr. Wallach talks about the importance of putting wood ashes on our garden. Would it be wise of me I have, limbs and things, to actually burn those to make wood ashes to put on my garden? And I love your information, and I'll listen offline to the answer. Thank you.
She wants to know, number one, about compost tea.
Yes. Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
These are some really good questions. It's going to take a couple minutes, but I'm going to answer them But before I do, I wanted to finish and tell you that if people will go to that website, Spring Valley Organic Growers, there is a contact email, and they can email me.
Okay.
And I did put in my greenhouse book, I did put my private number. And some people told me I was crazy for doing that, but so far I've gotten some really nice calls. So we go to the powermall.com and we order your book as far as the greenhouses, and we'll have your number. Okay, that's fair enough. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. The compost tea, a lot of people take like a 55-gallon drum, and they'll take a tow sack, we call it here in the Ozarks, a burlap bag or mesh bag or something, and fill it full of either real finely broken down stuff from your compost pile or manure, and they just tie a knot in it and hang it over the edge where that's in the barrel of water, and then they dip from that. Now, over in China, there's a fabulous book that would probably save you reading 40 other books. It's called Farmers of 40 Centuries. It's a very old book. It's incredible what they saw in China, rural China back in the 20s and so on. Each farmer had like a little pool in his backyard, and they just threw everything in there. Just kept throwing everything in there, vegetable scraps, everything. And then they would dip out of that and water their stuff. Now, I don't know why your pile doesn't work. Obviously, something is not getting enough oxygen and it's turned anaerobic, or maybe it's too cold.
Is there any kind of bacteria or yeast or anything you throw in there to make it break down faster?
Actually, biochar will do amazing stuff in your compost pile. Okay. And also, I inoculated my peas with a rhizobium you can buy at the farm store or anything, and I had some left over, and I just sprinkled it on my compost pile. Now, the blue corn, I am told, is one of the few corns that has not been genetically modified yet. So
now, why do they call it blue? Is the seed actually blue?
The corn is blue.
Oh, the corn is blue.
The corn is blue. If you get blue corn chips, they're just as blue as can be.
I had no idea.
It is one of the few corns that has not been genetically modified. Now, the wood ashes, I had a real epiphany many years ago. I went down to, when I moved here in the early 70s, there was a lot of land clearing going on in the mountains of north central Arkansas. And they would push the trees down, and they would push them up in big piles. They call them dozer decks. And either let them rot down, and it took many, many, many years, or they'd try and set them on fire and just burn them down. And I saw a pasture where they had successfully burned down one of these dozer decks. So there was, gobs of wood ashes. But all around that, in a ring 3 or 4 feet around, was the greenest grass you ever saw. Because when you burn wood, all that's left is minerals. Now, you don't want to put just too many on your garden, but we have a wood stove. We burn wood. I have for over 45 years. And I take the ashes out. We don't ever burn plastic or any kind of weird stuff in there, just paper and wood. And we take those ashes and we sprinkle them all over our beds all winter long. I can cover 8 gardens in the course of a winter. And we also put coffee grounds. We go to our little nearby town that has the trendy coffee house, and they're kind enough to give me 10 gallons of coffee grounds twice a week. And so we spread those as well. It's a good fertilizer, especially on blueberries, which we have.
So can you use too much ash or wood ash? Will it do something to burn things if you get too much on there?
Well, it's a pretty high pH. So you'll change the pH of your soil pretty good. But you don't have to turn the dirt black. I just sprinkle it, nice sprinkling all over, not real thin but not real thick, and let the rains and the snow take it in. You know that the snow the air we breathe is 76% nitrogen, or 78. When it rains, the rain falling down gathers nitrogen on its way down. It really gathers it if there's an electrical storm, lightning. Then you have a lot more. And the most is when snow falls. It has a lot
of nitrogen. Hang on one second here, Bill. We're going to the break. We'll be right back. Kerry Reams was even arrested for practicing medicine without a license because he checked people's urine sugars with his Brix refractometer and did a few other research papers on human beings and how to maintain healthy pHs and numbers with humans. And some of his research is still cutting edge today, even though it's like 50, 60 years old. He lived to be in his 80s, and he finally was, I believe he was killed in an automobile accident. We got another phone call from Bill in Oklahoma. Bill in Oklahoma, you're on the air with Ron Klinefelter.
Good morning, Ron. This is I've been over your place, in fact, just a month ago, and enjoyed visiting with you. On the compost tea, I was watching a YouTube video, and they put the air with an aquarium pump into it, and they said you was sure to make it aerobic that way. Would you agree with that?
Are you saying that putting air in it would make it aerobic?
Aerobic instead of anaerobic.
Yeah, you bet. You bet. Anaerobic bacteria thrives in the absence of oxygen. That's what you have in a septic tank or something. Yeah, you want to have oxygen in there. The same reason as you want to have oxygen down in the soil. We use a broad fork, which takes about 12 inches deep. There's a picture on my website of one I made out of hay rake teeth. You can buy one at Johnny's for a couple $100, but shipping. But it goes down and it disturbs, loosens the soil about 12 inches deep without inverting it, which is not what you want to do anymore. That's what they used to use as the moldboard plow. Very few people use that now. They use chisel plows.
Okay. And also on the compost tea, they were using it as a foliar spray when they're sure. He said if it had a sweet smell, it was all right. You
can, and the only thing you really have to filter it, it'll clog up your sprayer. We foliar feed with sea minerals and liquid seaweed and fish emulsion. And yes, your garden will smell like a fish hatchery for a day or two, but it really, really, really gives them a boost. And the Sonic Bloom, I don't know, that's a whole other topic, but they sell it at the Power Hour. A GI in, I think, Korea saw a woman throw her little boy under the treads of a tank, a military tank that was coming down the street, and crush his legs. And he was so horrified that it was life-changing. He went back the next day. He found that woman. He said, "Why did you do that?" And she said it made him a better beggar. And he got out of the military as soon as he could. He got degrees in botany, biology, and stuff, and he swore that he would do everything in his life to change that situation where people weren't hungry. And he invented the Sonic Bloom and found out that certain frequencies, which is out there a little bit, sounds like birds singing and stuff, will actually open the little mouths or the stoma of the plants to take in those minerals. So they would play that music over fields and stuff and then spray them and just get fabulous results.
Where can we get more information on that, Ron, as far as the Sonic Bloom?
Yeah, it's amazing concept. You know, sunflowers, especially if you're in Kansas, you know that they come up and they all face east, the flower heads. They've actually played that music with the frequencies embedded in it in the opposite, in the west end of fields, and had them turn their flower heads to the west.
Now, where can we get more information on the sonic bloom, Ron?
Well, I don't know. Joyce would have some, I guess, because they sell it, or they used to sell it.
Oh, okay. They have the music for it and all that? Okay. Thanks, Bill, for calling.
Okay, my guess is real pretty music, classical or hymnal or, whistling or whatever. But the bottom line is what's embedded in it is the exact frequencies that birds produce when they
Okay, Ron, thank you so much. We're out of time. Thank you so much for a fascinating hour with Ron Klinefelter. Thank you so much for being back on with me. Next hour, we've got another new guest where we have